Vilaça, Mrs. Presidente, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. It is an honor and a pleasure to be able to welcome you here at the 25th anniversary of Affordable Medicines Europe. This is an important milestone for our association. However, our work on the internal market started long before this. From the Piper case in 1974 over the Bristol-Myers Squibb in 1996 to GSK in 2009, our sector has tirelessly challenged restrictions to the free flow of goods and the integrity of the internal market. In fact, the GSK case, which had its origin in 1998, was one of the driving forces in establishing our association, then the European Association of Euro-Pharmaceutical Companies, EPC. As a small sector challenged by the pharmaceutical industry, our founders realized that the costs of defending the internal market had to be mutualized. The EPC was born. Today, we celebrate the decision of our founders to come together in that defense. We are proud that as parallel distributors, we bring competition in a market where elsewise is none. We are proud that we save healthcare systems billions of euros every year. In fact, we estimate that European-wide more than 6 billion euros are saved thanks to parallel trade. This is money that may be spent on other forms of healthcare. And mostly, we are proud that we have been able to do so against the odds. With the law of our union in hand, entrepreneurial spirit and courage in head and heart, and of course, a good team of lawyers to help us, we have helped establish some of the principles on which our union relies today. Looking back, the association started with a limited number of founding members. They were all entrepreneurs having built their business from scratch. These companies still form the backbone of our association, albeit many more have joined. Today we have more than 110 companies as members in 23 member states. Our members are still primarily owned and run by the founding entrepreneurs. So while we are competitors in our daily lives, we are also a family of family-owned businesses when we come together in this association. We have experienced several crises together over the past decades. Each time we have come out stronger. When the association was launched, we were still given many negative labels, such as grey market pharma. We were often accused of being the main entry point of falsified medicines, a risk to patient safety, and so on. Thanks to our continuous work as an association to educate policymakers, authorities, academics, supply chain representatives, patient representatives, and many more, we are in a place where most such myths are dispelled. We also ensure that our members are not only observing the rules, but we are front runners in ensuring the integrity of the legal supply chain. Our audit team, based on the good parallel distribution practices developed by the association, sets a new standard of self-regulation. In this context, we are also happy to welcome representatives of TÜV today here, the audit company responsible for auditing our members. As founding members of the European Medicines Verification Organization, we have taken our responsibility in implementing, on behalf of the public, the Falsified Medicines Directive. We have, over the last 10 years, put enormous resources and efforts into ensuring that patients are better protected in Europe than elsewhere else in the world, while still benefiting from price competition in the internal market. We have also, over the past decades, established a strong working relation with enforcement officers, private anti-falsification organizations, and national competent authorities in the fight against illicit trade. Most recently, we have engaged in the fight against theft of medicines with EU and non-EU authorities in the MediCEFT project. We are proud to see all these efforts have pushed criminals away from the legal supply chain. And we are therefore happy now to support the efforts of other legitimate sectors struggling to counter black market sale, typically online. We cannot speak over the past 25 years and crisis without mentioning COVID. COVID challenged not only our health system, but also the European Union more fundamentally. In the first weeks of panic, member states shut borders, banned exports in desperate attempts to safeguard supply, and so on. All to detriment of us all, because alone no country can prevail in this union. Our members experienced how they were barred from importing medicines crucial for patients, while in fact there were no shortages of those non-COVID related medicines. We worked days and nights for weeks and months to stop this madness. Here we have to give a special credit to the European Commission. In those key months, there was a fighting spirit on behalf of the Union and the internal market that we have otherwise missed for some time. Together, we got the COVID export restrictions removed or minimized. We hope we will be seen the next Commission work in the same dedicated way to remove the unjustified permanent export restrictions that we still suffer in several countries. They are an embarrassment to the internal market. It can be said no other way. Another challenge we all face at the moment is shortage of medicines. This is not a new topic. In 2020, we made a comprehensive position paper on shortages, outlining more than 20 recommendations on how to overcome the problem. We are very pleased to see that many of those recommendations have been taken on board by the Commission in their new proposal to tackle the situation. While exports may intuitively seem a logical explanation of shortages, this is not the case due to the regulation already placed on exports. We are therefore glad to see that the false accusations that our sector was the root cause of shortages have been rejected by both the OECD and the European Commission studies on this matter. In fact, today, our sector is crucial in alleviating shortages. Every day, we fill the gap when one member state is without a product readily available in another. We are proud to see the collaboration our members have established with patient associations in several member states, from Bulgaria to the Netherlands, in this context. In fact, we provide access not only in cases of shortages, but more and more so permanently for products which manufacturers either withdraw altogether from a member state or never launch in the first place. While this may not be traditionally considered parallel distribution, it is our presence, network and capacities that enable us to do so. As you have already heard, our sector has changed a lot over the past decades. Whereas most products flowed from south to north in the early days, we now see a significant change towards multi-directional flows. As many of you here know, today the 10 highest income countries in the EU actually deliver 52% of the exports. We have also welcomed a number of new member states to the EU. They have contributed as new source products, but they have also benefited from imports. Poland alone has savings over 100 million euros every year from our sector's activities. We have also seen member states leave the EU. Brexit, no doubt, was a massive disruption to our sector. We stand with our UK members, who we are proud to say are still our members. As I come to the end of this speech, I must of course thank a number of people without whom we not be here today. First, the founding members. You know who you are. Thank you. In this context, we must also give a very special thank to our former president, honorary vice president, and initiator of the association, Andreas Moringer, who I'm intensively sad to report passed away yesterday. Our thoughts are with Friederike, his wife, and the family, who asked not for a moment of silence, but to raise a glass in his memory. We will honor his wish to do so among the members at our dinner tonight. Also a thank you to all those who represented the association professionally over the years in Brussels. Donald MacArthur, Heinz Kobelt, Oliver Luxic, Diane von Teufelstein, Claudia De Sogus, Tommaso Piaggio, Eco Auguria, and Daniel Schübel. Also, a big thank to the current staff, Valerie, Olga, Matteo, Claudie, and of course Caspar. A special thank must also go to Richard Freudenberg. Richard, you served as a president for a decade. You worked as Secretary General, and you are now our honorary vice president. I must also thank all our members. It's a true pleasure to be president of an association which is as lively and thriving as it has never been before. We have dedicated, engaged, curious, and resourceful people around the table whenever and wherever we meet. I'm absolutely confident that this is not the last anniversary that this association will celebrate. Thank you to our hosts today, the European Economic and Social Committee and the Committee of Regions, and not least Mrs. Emilie Prosit, member of the EEC. With these words, it is a privilege to be able to hand over the panel today. President Monti, Mr. Cruz Vilaça, thank you ever so much for joining us. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jörg. And on behalf of all the members here today, also a thank you to you. Thank you. Also from my side, my condolences to Andreas's family. We will honor his legacy later tonight as they have wished us to do so. I can only say that Andreas would have been very pleased to see one of his brainchildren, this association, celebrate its 25th anniversary with the participation of such distinguished Europeans as sit beside me. It is indeed a true honor to welcome the two speakers. Unfortunately, our third speaker could not join in the end, but President Mario Monti, you are an Italian economist with a long and extraordinarily distinguished career in public service and academia. You are the former Prime Minister of Italy from 2011 to 2013, former European Commissioner from 1995 to 2004. Currently, you are serving as Italian Senator for life. In your life, you have served as a European Commissioner for 2 consecutive terms for the internal market first and afterwards for competition. As European Commissioner, President Monti, you fostered market integration while promoting tax coordination and sanctioned high-profile cases of abuse of dominance, anti-competitive mergers and illegal state aid. Academically, you graduated from Bocconi University and then pursued graduate studies at Yale University. You were professor of economics at the University of Trento, at the University of Torino, and then at Bocconi, where you also served as rector between 1989 and 1994, and then president until 2022. Due to this expertise and outstanding career, President Monti is without any doubt one of the figures that have played a pivotal role in fostering integration of our single market, and therefore we are incredibly honored to have you with us today. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I am very, very honored to have been invited here for this very important anniversary of one of the facilitators and actors of the creation of the single market, because that is the case for Affordable Medicines Europe. And this is also an opportunity which allows us to try and look at the long-term future of our single market. But before trying to do that, looking in the future, allow me to go a long way back, because I believe it was exactly in this very room, at the time belonging to the European Parliament, that I was scrutinized during my confirmation hearing to become Commissioner of the Internal Market in January 1995, not without emotion and fear, but I understand that I did pass that examination. The internal market is an incredible success story, and maybe its inspiring principles are too simple, although dramatically difficult to implement, for the internal market to be still appreciated and valued at the time when we have many other planets and stars in the universe of our reflections about Europe, all of which necessarily carry the adjective strategic next to them. And the internal market is old stuff. When I was asked after my time at the Commission in 2010 by then Commissioner Barroso to prepare for him a report on a new approach to the single market, I always prefaced my conversations on this topic that I did in all the member states that unfortunately the single market, by the way, I always called it single. I realize that internal market may be legally more appropriate, but I didn't care about this. I always said in the 90s when I started dealing with this topic that single, well, that the internal may convey to outsiders the idea that it is closed. I remember so many concerns in Washington and Tokyo at the time. Beijing was not on the map. And it was Peking. That they were all fearing Fortress Europe. I always made the case, no, we are not an internal market, but we aim to be a single market, which conveys also the ambition, the difficult ambition of being single, so integrated. At any rate, internal or single, that thing is definitely grey, a lot bureaucratic, boring, and definitely unsexy. So this is the great difficulty of attracting, for example, the minds and the hearts of our heads of states and governments on this nitty-gritty that is the single market. But they love, I have come to know them a bit, having been one of them for a little while, they love not to be forced to be too close with the issues of the single market, because if they were to be exposed with their figure to the successes or failure of the single market, they would have to be much bolder in moving towards European integration and less benevolent with their companies, with their various corporative bodies within their country to accept or erect obstacles against the free flow of goods and all the rest that you know. So it's a success story, and the story of affordable medicines Europe really shows what to me was at the time, but still is, as I look from distance now to the single market, the ideal, correct way of companies and their associations to interact with governments and policy institutions. That is to claim for what they have the right to. It was always very helpful in my 10 years at the Commission to have those entities, companies, association of companies, come and complain. Not always the complaints were worthwhile, but at any rate, you, I can say this specifically, you, Mr. President, you, Mr. Secretary General, you, Affordable Medicines Europe, have become one of the implementers of the single market. What a difference this pattern of behavior between companies and public authorities, what a difference relative to what we observe more and more today, when companies and their associations go more and more often, yes, to authorities, but to their national authorities, to seek protections from threats which may be real or largely the product of imagination many times. And there is nothing like imagining a catastrophe and telling it to a politician to impress the politician. When I stood firm with the end of the duty-free system on internal flights, at the natural deadline, because then with a single market in place, it would have been ludicrous to continue to have the tax advantages. There were demonstrations here in Brussels at the same time, because this is the ability of sometimes businessmen and unions to make a coalition out of fear to impress the authorities that, like was the case here, with the threat of 100 and the fear of 180,000 unemployed at the moment of dismantling of the single market, that would be, how could the Commission stick to that? We did stick to that as a matter of principle. And I think that airports and companies in that business have found other ways to prosper without a fragmentation in the single market. Now, I must say that our founding fathers put through the Treaty of Rome pretty powerful instruments in the hands of the Commission, although they are traditional and not very creative instruments, but the rules on the internal market and the rules on competition are very, very powerful. Coming here, I had to dig in my memory, and to facilitate this, well, I did not go into artificial intelligence, but simply I Googled parallel trade Monti. With the name hopefully being not the object of parallel trade, but the protector of parallel trade. And up comes this article of 16th of May 2001. Drug giants chew bitter pill over parallel traders as union heads for enlargement. The European Commission last week shot down an attempt by GlaxoSmithKline to prevent middlemen from cashing in on different drug price regimes across the Union. Peter Chapman speaks to two EU policy experts, etc. Few were surprised last week when European Commission antitrust chief, for once not Tsar, chief only, Mario Monti, decided to stop drugs giant GlaxoSmithKline from thwarting the parallel trade in its products. It was out of question, said Monti, that Glaxo should be able to prevent pharmaceuticals wholesalers from buying cheap medicine in Spain, where government intervention keeps the price very low, and selling it at a profit in countries where price is higher. But you could almost hear the size of frustration coming down the road from DG Enterprise, the business-friendly arm of the Commission, headed by Monti's compatriot Fabio Colasanti, whom I remember with great affection. The former Prodi cabinet man, whose brief takes in pharmaceuticals, would not be so rude as to criticize Monti's judgment. Clearly, I don't see that Monti had a choice, Colasanti says, pointing out that his department was fully consulted by the trust buster and his team, etc., etc., etc. So, when the instruments are there, it may be unpleasant in some respects, pleasant in other respects, but the instruments are there to be used. And if an institution has powers and does not use them fully in order, for example, to please member states or to please powerful companies. And member states, after all, are the shareholders of the Commission, but they set up the Commission in order for the Commission occasionally to reprimand them. And if powers are not used, then they are lost gradually. So let me conclude my remarks by saying that having had the enormous fortune of working on the single market with both hands, internal market first and competition secondly. And I was lucky also in the order of the succession, because had I started with the most powerful tool, competition, and ended up with a tool that exhausts the patience of the one who uses it, because infringement procedures and then bring a country to the court, etc., as the President will tell us, is very, very time-consuming. And so, in the meantime, the obstacle to the single market remains in place until the court eventually orders the member state to remove it. Whereas in competition, if you prohibit a merger, that merger is not consumed. When we prohibited here in Brussels the merger between General Electric and Honeywell in 2002, which was already approved in Washington, two American-based companies, not only did not the merger take place in Europe, but even in the US it was dismantled, it was not consummated, because the economics of the deal, taking away the huge internal market of Europe. Here is the strategic asset that Europe has and that it tends to forget at the time where it is rightly discussing strategic autonomy and geopolitical challenges. Give me another area where the US or other multinational companies are respecting the Commission and the European Union, like competition or trade or monetary policy. Not because they are run by Superman, but simply because these are the areas where the member states decided time ago to give central powers. Okay, now what I fear is that the pressures deriving from the geopolitical threats, which are there, which must not be denied, and I welcome the forthcoming European Council discussion on the Commission's economic security communication, but please do not, member states and Commission, do not give up, do not allow that the concerns, often very well founded, sometimes not, of companies about IRA from the US or other concerns from China, be dealt with through more and more disorder state aid, because this really erodes the basis of competitiveness of Europe. And you see, an activity like the one of Affordable Medicines Europe, of which you may have heard on occasions, benefits everybody, well, except temporarily some large companies, because it brings lower prices for consumers and, as was said, lower costs for national health services. But what is the spillover effect from more and more state aid? Not EU aid, but state aid allowed by the Commission. It's a fragmentation of the single market, a discrimination between countries with a deep pocket and countries without much of a fiscal space. And then there is a wonderful, unique country which I admire most, which believes belongs with another country to those with a huge fiscal space, and for this reason presses for more flexibility on state aid. Except that looking at the numbers, it does not have all that fiscal space, unlike its eastern neighbor. But France is like that. Who could ever attack France? An overuse of state aid, unlike what you did with affordable medicines, brings higher taxes for all citizens and for all companies, plus the distortions to the single market. Now, my last sentence will be an appeal to those who will make important decisions at the Commission and at the European Council. It's very good, I think, to have thought and devised tools for intervention in order not to weaken the strategic position of Europe and of European companies vis-à-vis huge non-European powers. But if in order to cope with that, it is felt as strictly indispensable to resort also to more flexibility for national state aid, then please make a compensation for that. What would be the compensation? At the same time, remove obstacles that are still there to the intra-EU movement and all that. Maybe consider eliminating some clauses that are still there that allow member states to protect themselves and their companies even from intra-EU investments, takeovers, etc., and step up enforcement. So maybe we could use the unwelcome pressure coming on Europe from the East and from the West in a way that brings us to more effective unity. If we will allow that pressure to scare us and to react, to have a reaction of Europeans through actions that will separate countries and sectors and fragment the ones from the others, well, we will have thought that we were putting in place a bold strategic initiative, but we would be simply creating for the US or China or both a highway telling us divide et impera. Thank you very much.
Thank you indeed very much. It was really inspiring to hear your thoughts, and I will quickly move on, and then we will come back and we will discuss a bit and take questions from the floor. But first, I have to introduce Professor José Luis da Cruz Vilaça. He is a former president of the Court of First Instance of the EU, as well as a former judge of the Court of Justice and Advocate General. Following Portugal's accession to the European Community, as it was called, in 1986, you immediately served as Advocate General, and later, between 2012 and 2018, as Judge of the Court of Justice of the EU, where you were also elected President of Chamber in 2015. From 1989 to 1995, he presided first by unanimous decisions of the governments of the member states and then by election of your peers as President of the newly established Court of First Instance for the European Community. Throughout your career, you have ceaselessly contributed as a judge, researcher, professor, author of numerous publications and conferences, as well as through the various institutions, associations and study groups to which you belong, to foster knowledge and development of EU law and competition law. Hence, it is with great honor that I welcome you today to this discussion on the single market, whose development and strengthening are also strictly linked to the role played by the European Court of Justice over the past decades. Thank you. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much for your very kind
Microphone.
introduction and presentation.
The microphone.
You have to push the button.
Thank you very much for your very kind introduction and presentation, Mr. Secretary General, Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen. Well, it is indeed a privilege to be here today, and also a great honor to share the floor with Professor Mario Monti. I thank you. I thank Affordable Medicines Europe for your invitation, and warmly congratulate you on your 25th anniversary in the same year as the officially declared 30th anniversary of the European internal market. It's 25 years of enhancing competition on the European market and contributing to the creation of real internal or single market in Europe. I don't care as yourself. It's not a legal concept that of single European. It's more a marketing concept. I've been asked. It's also a pleasure to talk here at the European Economic and Social Committee, and this building, which also hosts the Committee of Regions. For me, it's probably my first presence in this room, and I'm very proud for that. I've been asked to give my talk from a more legal perspective. I realize that legal perspective is even less sexy than economic perspective. I will try to, I hope there are not many lawyers in this room. I also hope that there are not too few lawyers in this room expecting to be understood by all of you. Portugal signed the accession treaty a few hours before Spain, because we asked for it before Spain. That's the only reason why we signed before. In June 1985, I personally joined EC in January 1986. It was already remembered when I took oath as Advocate General at the Court of Justice. I had pushed hard before that for Portugal's accession, in particular in 1981-82, when I led the negotiations as Secretary of State for European Affairs for the accession of Portugal. The mood at the time was not brilliant in Portugal. where after the initial national impulse for joining EC, the political will to join had considerably started to fade in the face of the enormous economic and social gap between developed EC and a country that 2 or 3 years later had its third IMF, International Monetary Fund, intervention since 1974. So we realize what was the situation at the time. On the EC side, it was a time of Eurosclerosis or Euro paralysis. It's been a long time ago. But when I took office in January 1986, I felt a different atmosphere in Luxembourg. Jacques Delors was president of the European Commission, and there was something new in the air. The white paper from the Commission on completing the internal market of June 1985 was the guide to follow to dismantle physical, technical and fiscal barriers with the aim to achieving by the end of 1992 a great internal market of 320 million people at the time, or 340 million people. I remember when, after giving my opinion in a given case, one of the older and most respected judges told me, I was a young advocate general at the time, in my 30s and 40. We have to it were his words, we have to give a hand to the Commission. Actually, I had proposed in that case to annul the Commission's decision for détournement de pouvoir, which is very rare, and they happen very rarely, but that's what the court did, in fact, in that case. And this is the first point I would like to stress here, is that there would never have been an internal market without an effective and strong synergy between the European Commission and the Court of Justice. Above all, because if the Commission didn't take the initiative to open infringement proceedings, it's not nice to open infringement proceedings against the member states. For what? For reminding the member states the unconditional commitments they had accepted when they signed the treaties. If the Commission did do that, the Court could not have exercised its powers. And conversely, if the Court had responded to the Commission, to the Commission's procedural initiative, with a barrier of indifference or complacency, it would not have been possible to develop a dynamic jurisprudence that made it possible to go far beyond the mere conception of the treaties as a wrong conception, as simply part of international law. This is not simply international law. This evokes probably the so-called judicial activism of the Court of Justice. I think that the judicial activism, or constructivism, better, was not born at the Court of Justice, and it was not made by the Court of Justice. It was born with the treaties itself. When the treaty authors, in what is now Article 19 of the TEU, defined the task of the Court as ensuring that in the interpretation and application of the treaties the law is observed, they gave the Court, indeed they gave the Court, a judicial lever to interpret the treaties and the treaty provisions in light and with the view of contributing to reach their objectives. I must say that properly speaking, the European Common Market, the expression internal market, it's in the treaty, indeed, but it only made its appearance in the Single European Act in 1986. But the European Common Market or the European Internal Market or Single Market began in 1963, in reality, with the Van Hendenloos judgment. You might remember the Van Hendenloos of February 1963. In that case, to answer the question whether the standstill clause in Article 12 of the EC Treaty had direct effect in national law, the Court of Justice developed a body of reasoning which had a decisive impact. That's why I touch upon this. A decisive impact on the development of the common market and of what I call European constitutional law. The court, in that case, the court stated that the treaty is more than an agreement between states, and that the community constitutes a new legal order for the benefit of which the states have limited their sovereign rights and the subjects of which are the member states and their nationals. That's where really the internal market was, in the facts, born. This means that as Article 12 contained the clear and unconditional prohibition of customs duties and charges of equivalent effect, it's a prohibition on the member states. Citizens could rely on that provision to claim rights which a national court is required to protect. Other cases, Costanel, Cimental, came to complete the picture with the so-called principle of primacy of community or EU law over the national laws of the member states. The immediate and obvious consequence of this was that citizens and companies, I stress this because it's particularly important in this context, citizens and companies became the main drivers of the construction of the internal market. Relying on this platform of principles, the court did not miss the next opportunity, and in a famous judgment of 1979, Dassonville opened the door to a broad interpretation of the concept of measures having an effect equivalent to quantitative restrictions on trade between the member states. So-called product requirements relating to shape, size, weight, composition, presentation, labeling and packaging, etc., are the classic example of measures which, although indistinctly applicable, may constitute the most insidious barriers to the free movement of goods. The main obstacle to trade implicit in such measures is the double regulatory burden they impose, on interstate traders who must comply with the rules of both their home and their host member states to be able to trade legally within the EU. It was another famous judgment, Cassis de Dijon, of 1979, which provided a solution to this problem and shaped the development of the EU internal market for decades to come. The court there laid down the general principle that remains at the heart of the functioning of an internal market, which is known as the principle of presumption of equivalence or the principle of mutual recognition. The immediate effect of Cassis was to replace dual regulation or double regulation of a product with a single regulation from the home state, which the host state must respect. This was considered at the time quite revolutionary. Now it makes part of our day-to-day life in the internal market. Is this, as some accuse the court to being doing, is this tantamount to giving extraterritorial application to the regulatory standards set by each home country? I do not think so. It would be rather strange to speak of extraterritorial application in the context of a single market, which is one of the core objectives of the treaties. Cassis, Dijon, and subsequent case law have thus made it possible to take account of the legitimate interests of economic operators in gaining access to the market of other member states with different national regulatory traditions, thus allowing a variety of products meeting similar needs to remain on the EU market. In this way, the presumption of equivalence obviates the need for a great deal of harmonizing legislation. I'm talking of two different models of organization of the internal market, a decentralized one and a centralized one. The centralized one is represented by the measures of harmonization within the internal market. We don't need measures of organization, measures of harmonization measures when we may benefit from the principle of equivalence and of this presumption set by the judgment in Cassis Dijon. But in doing so, it's also quite clear that, and you must admit it, that the case law subtly shifted the balance of power away from the member states and towards the Union, thereby increasing the court's scope for judicial review of national measures. So the role of the court was enhanced by this case law, which made traders taking advantage of this and beginning to challenge an increasing number and variety of national rules in national courts, even where the link with free movement was particularly tenuous, which raised the issue of the limits of the Court of Justice intervention in the interpretation of what is now Article 34 of the Treaty on the Functioning of the European Union. I could give you quite a lot of examples of cases where the court seemed to go too far away in dealing with measures, national measures, such as the ban on television advertising of certain products, like tobacco, alcoholic beverage, children's publications, or publications for children, or a case on resale at a loss and the prohibition of resale at a loss, a French case, or measures relating to the place or time at which products could be sold, bans on Sunday trading, the famous Sunday trading saga, or on advertising of parapharmaceutical products outside pharmacies, which led the court to clarify the situation and dot the I's on this point. That's what and also famous, less famous than the others, but also quite famous case or judgment in the case Keck and Mitoire of 1993 came, where the court tried to limit the famous Dassonville formula when it stated that the prohibition in Article 34 of the treaty should not apply to measures that can be considered as mere selling arrangements. This was, at the time, a clarifying decision which apparently limited the scope of intervention of the Commission and of the court itself in controlling national measures. The fact is that subsequent case law has significantly narrowed the scope of the judgment, and so did the EU legislator in the Unfair Commercial Practices Directive 2005/29. So Keck and Mitoire stood as a piece of case law and a tool also at the disposal of the European Commission to limit the intervention of the Commission and to avoid application of Article 34. The fact is that, as someone wrote in 2017, Stephen Wetherill, the internal market is an ambiguous legal concept. There is a kind of constitutional ambiguity, and this constitutional ambiguity had to be filled by the Court of Justice, and this left the EU judiciary a wide margin of interpretation as to the very nature of an international market and the content of this legal concept. It's the nature of law to fill the gaps and to fill the holes in order to give a discipline to any kind of situation that deserves it. As a consequence of this, I think that it is on the strength, authority, and efficiency of the EU judicial system that the effective application of the treaty rules on the internal market and the achievement of their objectives largely depends. But one point, in my view, is indisputable. The treaty itself mandates the creation of an internal market. And we now have a workable decentralized model of market building in which member states retain the freedom to regulate insofar as they do not exceed the limits set by the treaty. I would like to make one or two final points. First, as laid down in the treaties themselves, Article 3 of the TEU, the four freedoms, it's about the four freedoms that we speak when we speak of single market or internal market, cannot be dissociated from social, consumer, health and environment policies, or from other public policies such as security and public safety, territorial cohesion, promotion of equality between women and men, etc., etc. In short, And as explicitly stated in Article 3, paragraph 3 of the TU, the Union's internal market is closely linked to the concept of a highly competitive social market economy. The internal market has had its ups and downs, but it has withstood the winds and tides. And I would like to give you a very recent example, that of the energy crisis. And in this respect, I am happy to praise the EU legislator for preserving, to the greatest extent possible, the mechanisms of the internal market in the energy sector against a backdrop of severe restrictions and disruptions to supply caused by the Russian attack on Ukraine. Indeed, the emergency measures adopted to tackle the energy crisis resulting from the conflict have sought to ensure that the objectives of establishing an open and competitive market are safeguarded as far as possible, whilst preserving some mechanisms for price formation and giving priority to incentives to reduce consumption. I think it is the best tribute to the founding fathers of the EU and to Jacques Delors, the great promoter of the 1993 program, to remain faithful and fully committed to the idea of a single market, which is not just a vague political ideal, but a largely achieved reality, without which the European Union and the goal of united Europe would succumb to the temptations of protectionism and the demons of nationalism. A strong internal market is the cornerstone of the whole Union. But to remain part of our heritage of values, we cannot have an internal market that is not inspired by respect for human dignity, democracy, the rule of law, and the fundamental rights of the individual, as proclaimed in our Charter of Fundamental Rights of the European Union. This is also part of the EU legal order, and of its constitutional dimension. And let me, in this regard, conclude by saying that I am proud to have served for 15 years in a court that has been active in promoting those values. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much to the speakers. I am aware of time, although it was almost easy to lose all sense of time and place while listening to you, and I mean that seriously. First, I have to say that I had written a small introduction for our discussion, but there remains very little honestly to say about it. I had, amongst others, written that it was no coincidence we had invited exactly the two of you, but I think you have so eloquently yourself made it very clear to the audience why that was. I can also say that, that for our sector, as you said, which has really always been about really creating in practice the internal market the way it was intended to be, it is really a pleasure to hear. I also have to say that I had made remarks also on Cassis de Dijon and other cases, but I will only remain to say that here I feel again the spirit. When I started as a relatively young man 15 years ago in Brussels, when you went to meetings in DG Markt, the meeting room was called Cassis de Dijon. And I have to say I miss that a little bit nowadays when we go to the now DG Grow. It's no criticism, but the spirit I find sometimes could be stronger. We have touched upon the judicial activism, the white paper of '85, the subsequent modern single market. And I thank you very much for clarifying. I started in Brussels in 2009. One of the first things that I had to do was to write a summary of your report that came in 2010. And I have always, to this day, been confused why half the literature says single market and half the literature internal market. And now I know the source.
There was a footnote.
I missed a footnote.
Thank you. This is really something I personally appreciate to have also the root cause of this. So, without taking too much of our joint time for having a drink informally, I do wish to ask a few questions just to follow up, and especially, I think we have touched, or you have touched upon it, Mr. Monti, specifically on the enforcement powers of the Commission. I know that there are many members in this audience today who are a little bit frustrated with the lack of rule of law in the sense of access to justice, meaning that you can have your cases tried, that they are tried within a reasonable time frame. And here I'm not asking for 1 or 2 years, but we have cases 10 years along, no decisions. We are asking not for a standard reply of, we use our discretionary power not to do anything, you can go to national courts, which I have to sadly say in many countries are not currently necessarily with the European Union at heart. So are we wrong in our sector? Is that our sector's feeling, or is this something you have seen and recognized elsewhere as well? A lack of willingness to enforce in totality, both from the Commission but also from Member States, those joint rules we have made.
No, I respect very much the difficulties that the Commission at any rate has with limited services, complicated cases, and I understand that there have to be priorities in enforcement. And now, nevertheless, I think it will be necessary. I think that huge progress has been achieved in devising the modalities with some decentralization at the level of the member states, etc., increasing dialogue with the member states, trying to prevent issues rather than simply fighting them once they are there. But I would stress that without criticism to anybody, but the crucial point is, are those in charge ready to undergo personal political costs? Because you do not make either big leaders of companies or heads of governments or ministers of finance happy if you stubbornly pursue certain behavior, unless it is the cynical play of the game of bashing Brussels. I remember in the case of state aid, many cases where the finance minister would come to see the commissioner, hoping within four walls that the Commission would say no to a certain state aid case, sometimes openly telling, I know for first that this is money thrown from the window, but you will understand, Commissioner, we have elections in 3 months. And I must say that for years I myself accepted this game, because after all, what matters for the Commission is the relevance of the effect. But maybe it was a mistake, because by doing so the Commission has accepted a lot of burden on its shoulders, which was not necessarily to be carried by the Commission. So I'm sure that some technical and legal improvements can still be achieved. I'm not fresh enough in my experiences as to be able to suggest which ones. But I see at the end of it a strong political problem, and the more the European Union is in fact guided by the member states, which try to erode the space for the Commission until the moment when they are in full despair, like with COVID, then it's normal that certain fights. I mean, I read something in Politico this morning about a case with Germany. I don't know the case, but it was amazing to see the length of this procedure. So I think we are, generally speaking, at a moment when Europe, the maintenance of the Europe we have, let alone the conquest of more Europe, does not come for free. Those who want it, who are engaged in this historic exercise, must be ready to see. I mean, one of the highest profiles in EU history is a German Chancellor, Helmut Kohl, who lost his election to his opponent in 1998 because he wanted to complete his grand design of putting next to the reunification of Germany the advent of a single currency for all of Europe, whereas his citizens wanted very much to keep the Deutsche Mark. And he lost the elections, but the Europe came, and he is a giant of European history. David Cameron tried to use a referendum in order to establish on more solid ground his power in his party in the UK, and we know the historical consequences of that act. So I think that it is only now, from now on, a business for people who are ready to suffer. But this comes just before your cocktail. So.
Yeah, exactly. So what I can tell you is that the people in this room, and our association at least, is willing to contribute to the suffering. We are here. I think I have to draw it to a close. So those questions I promised you could ask, don't hesitate. I'm sure that both speakers are more than willing to answer your questions when we go to the cocktail reception. Maybe also the suffering of EU integration may be lightened with something more fresh. Again, I would like to say thank you very much. It was really an honor and a pleasure. And I think you have reinvigorated my members, and I kid you not, for the next 25 years. It's not so often we hear political capacities and judicial capacities of your magnitude who actually goes in the defense of our core principles at the cost of their political demeanor. So thank you very much. Thank you very much. And now I wish everyone will join us for a cocktail. Thank you to Emily for hosting us, to the committee, to the regions, and to everyone, and to the team who made this happen. So thank you very much. And let's continue discussions in the atrium. I think on the 6th floor, Emily will lead the way, and I will be the backstop then, if you agree. Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you. I think your members are very happy when you look at their face. So happy for you.
And there you fell.